Hey everybody, it's Jinx here, back to look at another survival horror classic. Last time we looked at Dino Crisis, a cross-genre meld that was like Resident Evil and Jurassic Park had a baby. This time we're going to look at another cross-genre meld, one you might not be expecting. What if Resident Evil and Final Fantasy had a baby? Well, in this case, you get Parasite Eve. Now, before I get into the review proper, I just want to note one of my fondest memories of this game was the stellar soundtrack. I mean, just listen to this. Parasite Eve was released in North America on September of 1998. The game itself takes place in the year prior, 1997. We take the role of Aya Brea, a rookie detective in the New York Police Department, who at the start of the game just looks like she wants to have a nice night at the opera. Now, of course, things don't go as planned, because we end up chasing an evolved human life form named Mitochondrial Eve all over New York, who is hell-bent on destroying humanity with the power to turn anyone else she so much as looks at into a crispy corpse.
Ah, delectable. Indeed.
Yes.
Oh dear, what is it?
I've spontaneously combusted.
Oh, I am sorry. Oh, it's quite all right. I've grown tired of living.
The only person unaffected by Eve's powers seems to be Aya herself. This game is actually a sequel to a Japanese horror novel, and there's quite a few references to it within the game itself. Thankfully, none of them are over-intrusive or take you out of the game. There is one character who, however, does often refer to a similar incident happening in Japan years prior to the start of the game. Unlike traditional survival horror games of the time, Parasite Eve had a unique control scheme. Much more akin to other RPGs of the time like Final Fantasy VII, you could move in full 360 degrees. Action was handled in a very Final Fantasy style fashion, where you would take turns and wait for your attack gauge to fill before you could take another turn. Actions would range anywhere from using your gun to attack, to using items, or to using special abilities akin to magic. Not much unlike the main villain of the game, Eve, Aya begins to manifest special powers early on in the game. She can use these in any range of abilities that make up the game's magic system, from healing herself, to doing direct damage to enemies, or to inflicting status effects such as slow and silence. Unlike in most traditional RPGs, the parasite energy that's used in the magic system actually recovers over time instead of having to use special items to recover it. I feel this allows combat to stay quick and fast-paced all throughout even the most drawn-out battles. That being said, while I find the game spoils you for choice and abilities, I did find a lot of the spells useless. The confusion, slow, and blind spells didn't do much as battles are often quick, and bosses tend to be immune to all status effects. I found most of the time I use the magic to heal up, as you do take a lot of damage during battle. During combat between attack phases, you'll find yourself shuffling Aya around the battlefield, mostly avoiding enemy attacks and lining yourself up for the next set of your attacks. Now, while most damage can be avoided, there's a select few enemies that can really drive you into corners and just deal out unavoidable damage. Battles themselves would take place in predetermined locations in a semi-random format, so often you could run across the same particular battlefield and only get in battle sometimes. This can get really annoying when trying to grind experience on Aya or farm specific items, especially when combined with the fact that Aya crawls across the overworld map at a sluggish pace. Overall, I find enemy variety to be really amazing for this type of game. Every area has tons of unique enemies, and reskins are rare and far between. After battle, you will gain experience points that level up, increasing your overall stats. You'll also earn bonus points that the game doesn't really explain to you, but you can spend in the bonus point menu which you can spend on upgrading your weapons further, or increasing your inventory slots or action speed. There's so many weapons in this game. There's shotguns, pistols, submachine guns, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, rifles, and there's plenty of choices within each category, all of them being different within stats, firing speed, reload speed, and total clip size. And then you can even get into the weapon customization system, which adds another layer of depth to an already complex system. Anytime you find yourself at the NYPD is a great time to go visit the weapons locker. The two officers there, Wayne and Torres, will tune up your weapons to add additional slots that you can use to customize them within the weapon customization system. While exploring areas, or sometimes as rare reward from combat, you'll receive tools that are used in the weapon customization system. These can be used to move special abilities or stat points from one weapon to another. If you're creative enough, you can make some pretty crazy combinations, such as a handgun that shoots out multi-shot blasts like a shotgun with poisonous rounds. Don't be picky in upgrading your equipment because there's lots of weapons to go around and a lot of upgrades to go. You can definitely make the best weapon you want with very little effort. Overall, I really like the gameplay mechanics that Parasite Eve brought to the survival horror genre, especially the combat mechanics, as they keep combat fresh and entertaining well throughout all the game. My one gripe with the game mechanics though would be the overworld exploration. As I mentioned before, Aya tends to move very slowly across the map in an almost unnatural fashion, and some key items needed to progress in the game are hidden with absolutely no direction where to find them, and they need almost pixel perfect precision just to find them. Square was known for two things really, making great RPG games and pushing the visual fidelity of any game they created for any console to the very limit. With games like Final Fantasy VII in their lineup, Square was the company all others will look to when showcasing the graphical fidelity of any console they deemed to grace with their presence. While in retrospect, we can look back at these PlayStation 1 games as primitive looking, blocky. At the time, these were mind-blowing masterpieces. Parasite Eve was to be no exception to this rule. Being a 2-disc game, we know that Parasite Eve is going to be chock full of cutscenes. Some of the most impressive I find are the creature transformation scenes they show once in a while. Very gruesome and show the real horror elements that they were trying to capture in this game. While pre-rendered backgrounds are pretty bog standard in survival horror, Square had a leg up as they had used pre-rendered backgrounds as well in Final Fantasy VII, so they were well versed in their use. Parasite Eve uses these pre-rendered backgrounds greatly, from all the locations from the New York Police Department's messy detective office to the Opera House. The game has a massive variety of areas to explore, and very few could be called out for being boring or bland. They use the pre-rendered backgrounds amazingly for some great environmental storytelling as well along the way. The character models in Parasite Eve look really great, especially when you compare them to their counterparts from Final Fantasy VII. Square was a company that's released so many games you can really watch as their character models grow over time, from Final Fantasy VII to Parasite Eve to Final Fantasy VIII. Almost all the characters you will meet in Parasite Eve are uniquely designed and have a lot of character just in their character models. Also note that this game has absolutely no voice acting, so the character models have to do a lot of the extra lifting to get the character narratives across. While it doesn't happen often, there are a few very dialogue-heavy scenes in the game, and unfortunately without a voice cast to back them up, the character models can only do so much to save the scenes from becoming a little boring at times. I feel this is a bad habit Square brought over from their RPG days, as a very text-heavy exposition dump is expected in an RPG game, not so much in a horror game. We're really looking for the environment and the characters to tell a lot more of the story in detail. But enough about the character models. The monster models are where it's at. The monsters are very varied and expressive, each with their own unique identities, abilities, movement patterns, and each one more gruesome than the last. Enemy designs will range anywhere from mutated rats to more exotic creations, such as boomerang-armed monkeys. The absolute amount and variety of enemies you'll find is astounding. I especially like all the boss monster designs as they're extremely gruesome. The enemy design is not only unique, it's all really well themed. Everything in this game almost looks like it was ripped straight out of a David Cronenberg movie. Each design is a painfully twisted version of the original creature on display. When you take all these aspects with the character design, the enemy design, the amazing CG cutscenes, Parasite Eve is really a feast for the eyes. A very twisted feast for the eyes, but a feast for the eyes nonetheless. Combine this with the game's stellar soundtrack, and the overall game is just a visual and audio tour de force. Now, Square is known for making great RPG games, and Parasite Eve was really no different, but it's a long one, so strap in. Oh, and spoilers ahead. If you don't want the story spoiled, be sure to click here to skip straight ahead to my recommendation. The game starts out perfectly normal. Aya is going to the opera on Christmas Eve with an unknown man for a date. Don't worry about this guy, we don't learn anything about him or really ever hear from him ever again. If you watch my Dino Crisis review, I'm just gonna call this guy Johnny. This guy's Johnny. We follow Aya and Johnny down into the main opera hall, where they sit down and start watching a pretty ham-fisted opera play out. But once the cast's main character, Melissa, starts singing, we go directly into a CG cutscene where she's giving a killer performance. You could even say it's on fire. But wait, it's not the song that's on fire, it's that guy in the back. He's on fire, and the curtains are on fire, and the stage is on fire, and oh god, everyone's on fire. Now, I've never been to the opera, but I don't think you're supposed to spontaneously combust when you're at the opera. I think it's pretty rude. Melissa continues to belt out a tune that's setting the place on fire. Aya doesn't have any time for this, so she pulls out her pistol and tells her date to get out of here now. She charges the stage and confronts Melissa. And Melissa, in response, starts to shoot energy beams at her. Okay, that's cool. That's perfectly normal.
Very cool.
Aya boldly continues her pursuit in spite of the strange circumstances. It's here we see our first mitochondrial mutation. It appears to be a little rat. And it's no. Well, that's a big boy now. So after witnessing this beautiful display, Aya makes quick work of it through battle, and afterwards she takes a quick moment to speak her mind. After exploring the basement, we find Melissa's dressing room. Inside we find a key to the locked backstage practice room, and Melissa's diary. It appears she snatched the lead role from another singer who, funny enough, spontaneously combust, and that weeks prior to the event she's been ramping up her medication from the hospital. Whatever's in those pills, it doesn't seem to be helping. We continue on to the practice hall, where we confront Melissa once more. She seems to be losing control mentally to another being within her. This new consciousness likes to be referred to as Eve, mitochondrial Eve. It's now when she gets swole and fights us one more time. After we defeat her, she blows a hole in the floor once more and escapes down into the sewers. Throwing caution to the wind, we once again give chase. Now, not a lot really happens in the sewers below the opera hall, but it is here where we do see that everywhere Eve goes, monsters tend to follow in her wake. We finally corner Eve at the end of the sewers. Thankfully this time, she has nowhere to go. That's at least what they wanted us to think. After another brief conversation, Eve takes off, turning herself into a gel-like substance and slipping through the bars that block her only way out. She does, however, leave us a new friend to play with. Unfortunately, this electrified alligator is as close as we get to seeing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in this game. Once we defeat the big guy and turn him into a new handbag, Aya returns to the front of the opera house, who is then ambushed by a news reporter. It's here that Aya is informed that she's the only person to make it out of the opera house alive. Funnily enough, it is actually mentioned that Aya's date, the guy I call Johnny, actually survived the ordeal. It just obviously wasn't newsworthy enough. Poor guy. The reporter continues to question Aya, who understandably doesn't really seem to be wanting to answer questions at the moment. Thankfully, her partner Daniel strolls in just at the right moment, and he has no love for the free press. He walks in and he just flattens the reporter. It's here that we are taken to day 2 in the events of the game. Here the pace slows down quite a bit after the brisk whirlwind we just came from. A lot of exposition gets dumped on us from here, but stay with me, it doesn't overstay its welcome and gives us a lot of answers to most of our questions up to this point. We start day 2 in Aya's NYPD precinct. It's here we get to know some of the supporting cast, mainly Daniel and the chief of police. While they're the main focus, all of the detectives in the police department feel like fleshed out characters, not just cardboard cutouts. The precinct itself is well detailed and feels like it's pulled right out of a 90s cop flick, with cramped offices and desks filled with paperwork and garbage.
You're a genius. We're both geniuses. Thumbtack, look, that was my thumbtack.
I personally feel that this really lived-in world feel is only possible with the pre-rendered backgrounds during this time, as 3D backgrounds tended to be a little more stale due to concerns with having to model every coffee cup. Aya is called into the chief's office. She does her best to explain the events at the opera, and surprisingly enough, the chief plays ball. I guess it's really hard to deny the theater full of burnt corpses in any other explanation. The chief then tells Aya that they're going to do everything in their power to solve this case. Turns out, everything in his power is to give you a new gun, and that's about it. So before Aya heads to the streets to hunt more mutated monsters, she takes the newly minted mod permit down to the weapons depot, where we meet Wayne and Torres, who both oversee the weapons lobby. Torres runs the place with an iron fist. He is as straight-laced as it gets, and he bemoans even handing out a single bullet to anyone for any reason. Wayne, on the other hand, the apprentice of sorts, is a hot-headed gun nut who would probably give you a rocket launcher to apprehend a shoplifter. While you don't spend much time with them overall, the few moments that you do get are really good. The back and forth between them really gives off the master-apprentice vibe, and overall, they have a great character arc that plays out until the end of the game. So we're packing some heat now. We head out of the armory, and if you take a quick stroll down the hall, we'll find the K9 squad. I doubt anything bad will happen here. Anyways, we head back into the main hall and find Ben, Daniel's son. He gives us a quick exposition dump about Daniel, explaining that him and his wife are separated. This is seemingly due to Daniel not having a very good grasp on a work-life balance. Ben then reminds Daniel that the three of them promised to go see a concert in Central Park later that night. Daniel obviously has to decline due to the whole people exploding thing, but this obviously isn't the first time he's blown his family off, as Ben runs away saying fine. After this altercation, we report back to the chief. Turns out that they are holding a press conference about the incident at the Opera House, and as the sole survivor, we have been asked to be present. We have also been told to shut the hell up and not say anything crazy so that we don't send people into a panic. It's here that we find out Aya might have an issue with being told what to do, because at the first opportunity, she begins to tell all, and she really leans into it. Fire, brimstone, science this, mitochondria that, exploding people, everybody's gonna die. The press throws a fit. So that probably could have went better. We're pulled back into the chief's office for a verbal beatdown, in the process of which we receive a tip that there's actually a new science exhibit at the Museum of Natural History that actually is speaking about, guess what, mitochondria of all things. So we head down to the Natural History Museum to see what's up. Once we arrive at the museum, we're greeted by Clamp. No, not that Clamp. This Clamp.
Maybe you should give him the clamps.
Dr. Clamp. He is a scientist who conveniently happens to be studying mitochondria. He gives a really big exposition dump here, and most of it actually isn't that far-fetched, as Parasite Eve's basic concept is actually rooted in some solid science.
Yes, science!
Minus the telekinetic powers and blowing people up stuff. The basic concept is that mitochondria can actually be viewed as a type of parasite. Get it? Get it? As they are a separate organism that lives within our cells and are responsible for making energy that we use in everyday life. The game takes some, let's say, artistic liberties with this concept, and uses the base idea that Eve, and by proxy Aya, are able to control their mitochondria at will, or the mitochondria of others, to use their paranormal powers, such as making all the mitochondria in a person work overtime to overheat the person to a point of spontaneous combustion, or Aya's quick healing abilities. I'm not sure if it really explains the energy beams from the hands, but that's what we're given to work with. Clamp also mentions that the mitochondria evolve 10 times faster than we do as humans, implying that Eve and Aya have mitochondria that are so evolved they may have become self-aware to an extent, explaining how Eve took over Maya's body. While all this is interesting, it really doesn't explain why Eve is doing all of this, how to stop her, or even how to locate her. Overall, the entire trip seems to be mostly a bust. Dr. Clamp does seem to be a little too interested in his work, but as soon as Aya mentions Eve, Clamp suddenly shuts up and asks us to leave immediately. Aya can't seem to shake the feeling that she knows the doctor from somewhere, but just can't place it, so they return back to the police station. We arrive back at the police station and are briefed that people are gathering at Central Park for a scheduled performance of the same opera that Aya was attending at the start of the game. Obviously, this performance was cancelled after the incident, but it seems that people are gathering at the stage anyways. Turns out that this is the same show that Daniel's son invited his father to. So we storm out of the police station, rushing to Central Park before we get a repeat of the Opera House Massacre. Daniel then attempts to rush to his son's aid, but is blocked by an invisible barrier of sorts that threatens to light him ablaze if he gets too close. We, being immune to Eve's powers of combustion, decide to head in solo. We arrive at the performance stage in the center of the park, and despite having turned into a monster, Eve appears center stage to what I can only call a literally captive audience. And as soon as Eve starts singing, instead of turning everyone into a charred corpse, everyone just kinda melts. What confuses me about this is why they didn't leave at least a skeleton behind. But whatever, everyone turns into goo and just disappears. We confront Eve, but as usual, she splits as soon as we arrive. We chase her through Central Park and find her waiting at the end with a horse-drawn carriage of all things. She beckons us to join her for a ride that Aya for some reason obliges. Once aboard, Eve lights up the horse like it was Ghost Rider, and the horse starts racing off. And so starts an infuriatingly tight quarters fight with Eve, with only the coach of the carriage to move around. The fight prematurely ends when the horse is sick of burning and crashes the carriage, knocking Aya out and allowing Eve to escape. Thankfully, we meet Ben, unaffected by the trance-like state that seems to be affecting all the other patrons. Aya tends to drop off the map for a little bit here, so we actually follow a few other characters for a couple of minutes. We see Daniel take his son Ben to the police station so that he can be safe. Oh, and he meets the nice little dogs. Nothing bad's gonna happen here. I know I keep saying it, but nothing bad's gonna happen here. Heavy-handed foreshadowing aside, Daniel also learns that the entire city has been ordered to evacuate due to the above-average chance of death. It's here that we're introduced to another new character, a Japanese scientist named Maeda, who came to the United States after hearing about the Opera State incident. We don't really learn a lot about Maeda in the game. All we know is that he's a Japanese scientist that witnessed the events that happened in Japan. These events were in the book Parasite Eve that the game is based on. Maeda is finding the city being closed off a bit of a problem as he's trying to get into Manhattan, not out of it.
I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Not being able to speak much English, he has a very hard time with the police officers running a blockade. The one police officer he's speaking to mainly comes off as very xenophobic, as he tells him that if he can't speak the language, to get the hell out of the country. In a show of karma, the police officer blocking Maeda becomes a perfect distraction for him to enter the city when he lights up out of nowhere. Maeda takes his opportunity and runs into the city. Aya wakes up in an abandoned house that seems to have electricity and an indoors oil drum fire? This place can't be up to code. Somebody call Mike Holmes. However, she is not alone as Maeda sits on a couch greeting her as she wakes. He informs her that Daniel found her in the street and took her here to rest. Aya then waxes poetic about how she must be a monster like Eve and beats herself up about it, trying to decide whether she should continue or if she should stop her pursuit of Eve. Aya decides to get a little bit more rest before making her final decision, and thus starts day 3. After getting a good night's rest, Aya decides that she has to stop Eve, so she continues her journey. Aya, Maeda, and Daniel make quite a motley crew as they all join forces. Maeda asks if there's any research facilities he could use to test a theory that he has. They surmise that Dr. Clamp's lab in the museum is the best bet, as he should have been evacuated with the rest of the citizens and his facilities should be free to use. This is the last exposition dump we'll get before action starts to ramp up from here. It's here we learn more about Eve and Aya's evolved mitochondria. As in another cool CG cinematic, we see how Eve's cells aggressively attack any human cells they come in contact with. But Aya's cells and mitochondria can resist the attacks, explaining how she's unaffected by Eve's control. Not long after this revelation, Dr. Clamp bursts in the room, demanding to know why they're sullying his lab. He looks at his instruments and comes to the same conclusions as Maeda not long after. He begins to grill Aya about any changes that she's experiencing due to the evolved cells within her. But before he can get too far with his inquisition, Daniel interjects, interrupting Dr. Clamp, as on his PC he found a document that has his wife and son's name on it, along with a long list of other names. He attacks Dr. Clamp and demands to know what the list is for, but Dr. Clamp clamps his mouth shut and demands that they leave his lab immediately. Leaving with more questions than we have answers, the team heads to the precinct to regroup. When we arrive though, the place is being torn up by monsters. Turns out Eve isn't keen on the police's plan to stop her. Before we enter, Maeda decides to stay behind, as he is a lover, not a fighter. Before we enter the fray, Maeda passes us a good luck charm. Hold on to this, as this, like any other good luck charm, does, wait for it, nothing. Absolutely nothing. If anything, this good luck charm acts as a hindrance, clogging up precious inventory space. First stop in the precinct is the armory, where we find Torres fatally wounded by a monster he refused to shoot. Him and Wayne give us a lot more backstory explaining the tragic reasons Torres refuses to use a gun. Turns out his daughter was killed in an incident involving a handgun and has sworn to never touch a gun again in his life. I mean, sure, I get sticking to your convictions and all, but I highly doubt the monsters were moved by your noble actions. Torres takes off to that great armory in the sky, leaving Wayne in charge, so we arm up and head off to the upper floors of the precinct, as this is where Ben has fled in the chaos, chasing the police dog he met earlier, Shiva, who appears to be running away from Ben. To keep him safe. From what, you ask? From herself. Well, shit. Aya races to the roof to save Ben, but doesn't make it in time to prevent Shiva from transforming into Cronenberg Cerberus. Thankfully, the chief of police does arrive in time and buys Aya the time she needs while he fends off the now transformed police dog. We arrive at the top floor of the precinct just in time to fend off Shiva and put her out of her misery. We reunite Ben with his son once again. Having saved Ben and put Shiva down, everyone sets down to recollect themselves as we go into day 4. Maeda turns up in the precinct's lab, where he has come to a rather grim conclusion. Eve's body can't hold up for much longer in its current form, so to achieve her goals of world domination, she is attempting to give birth to the ultimate being.
Ultimate being.
This
Ultimate being.
was the death of the previous Eve in the events of the book, as the mitochondria of the father fought against the mitochondria of Eve herself, ended up killing both the mother and the child that she gave birth to. So with this new information, the team decides the best course of action is to cut Eve off from being able to conceive this child and letting her burn out on her own. So Aya heads off to the only sperm bank in town to foil Eve's plans. We arrive at the hospital, and before entering again, Maeda gives us another good luck charm, which is as useless as the last one. It also turns out that Eve is one step ahead of us again. and sends Aya's elevator crashing into the basement. It's in this hospital that we learn that Dr. Clamp has been conspiring with Eve, and the source of the hyper-evolved mitochondria actually isn't Melissa herself, but Aya's dead sister Maya. When she was a child, Aya's family was in a fatal car crash that killed everyone but her. As Maya was an organ donor, she posthumously donated her liver to Melissa, who needed it at the time to live. Fun fact, apparently while harvesting the liver, the doctor who was holding it screamed that it was too hot to touch.
He's missing his liver. That's how some kids react to the cafeteria food. The lucky ones.
Why they decided to transplant this into another person after this, beyond me, but they put that hot potato in anyways. Aya herself received an eye transplant from her sister, explaining how she received the hyper-evolved mitochondria as well. It also turns out that Dr. Clamp was Melissa's doctor, and that he was the one giving her pills to suppress her own mitochondria, allowing Eve to take over the way she did. When we finally arrive at the top floor of the hospital, we find that the sperm bank has already been raided, and that Clamp gave Eve super sperm that have no mitochondria, allowing her to conceive the
ultimate being.
with no ill effects to her or the child. We chase Eve to the roof of the hospital, where she slips away from us once again by coming at us from two fronts, sicking a giant monster spider on us, and crashing a jet that was flying overhead into the building. Thankfully, being the badasses that we are, we escape the hospital just in the nick of time. Left once again with no leads, we are actually allowed to investigate several different areas now, but only one of them will move the plot forward, and that's in Chinatown. Eve got one up on us again, so the search continues once again in day 5. After arriving, we find ourselves once again down into the sewers, where we wind up finding a giant reservoir that's clogged up with the massive goo that was once the concert goers of Central Park. Surmising that Eve may be trying to infect the water supply, Aya purges the tanks of goo into the river, where suddenly the goo itself comes to life and flees toward the museum. It doesn't take Aya long to put together that this is where Eve has been taking maternity leave, so we race off to the museum to find the mother-to-be. When we arrive at the museum, we immediately head to Dr. Clamp's office, but unfortunately we're blocked off by the exhibits themselves. It turns out that Eve can even use the bones of dinosaurs to create mitochondrial monsters. Once we arrive at Dr. Clamp's office, we find that Mayada has been held up in here running more tests. He gives us another item, and thankfully it's not a good luck charm. This time, it's a useless gun with one attack. He tells us this should have some effect on Eve's mitochondrial monster, but in its current form, it doesn't do anything useful, and just again serves as a wasted inventory slot. Once we receive this gift, Clamp bursts into the room, raving to both of them about how he is in cahoots with Eve, and when Aya persists that she will be stopping Eve, Clamp attempts to stab her with a scalpel. Daniel, like the bro he is, arrives in the nick of time, and he hates nerds as much as he hates journalists. He knocks Clamp flat on the floor with a punch. Cornered, Clamp then shouts to the heavens that he is ready. But for what? Ready for what, man?
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Clamp then explodes as Aya tells Mayada and Daniel to jump out of the window. Being immune to Eve's immolation, Aya consoles Clamp as he passes on to the next life. She takes his key to reach further into the museum. Eve is finally in sight, but we're cut off by a Triceratops who just doesn't know when to quit, as after we're finished fighting him, he actually comes back from the dead and pushes us off the ledge into the waiting arms of a newly reanimated T-Rex. After we re-extinct this guy, we finally climb back up to where Eve is resting. Now seemingly cornered, Aya finally gets a chance to put a bullet between Eve's eyes. But getting caught up in monologuing with Eve, Aya doesn't notice that she's just playing for time, as suddenly all the goo from the sewers bursts from the streets, doing its best Stay Puft Marshmallow Man impression, and whisks Eve away to safety once again. It's at this point you might be asking yourself, what is the rest of the world doing considering a giant goo monster has now appeared in Manhattan? Well, it turns out they haven't just been sitting on their thumbs this entire time, as the military finally rolls in to save the day. And they failed miserably. It turns out no human can even get close to the monster, though spontaneously combusting. But not all is lost. The military has heard about Aya being immune to Eve and bring her to an aircraft carrier that's anchored in the bay. Here they explain a plan to use Aya to spearhead a last-ditch effort on attacking the goo monster that has taken up residence near the Statue of Liberty. Aya agrees to the plan, but before we get to go on an action-packed helicopter ride, Maeda stops us, trying to give us one last thing. Daniel, knowing full well that this is probably garbage, stops Maeda, and so we head on our way. After a brief action-packed cutscene, Aya finally manages to land the decisive blow, taking the monster out. The monster collapses into a pile of goo, taking the Statue of Liberty out with it, covering the bay. And so ends our story of Parasite Eve. Wait, what? It's not over yet? Ah, shit. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Eve emerges from the goo in the bay and confronts Aya for one last confrontation. We confront Eve for the last time. During a very hectic battle, Eve takes on several different forms, each one more vicious than the last. If you're not ready for this fight, it will actually put you through the ringer. Unfortunately for Eve though, it seems that her time has finally run out, for as her final form shatters and melts back into the goo that she initially emerged from. It's actually over this time.
Nope.
Wait, not yet? God damn it!
Why don't you just fucking die already?
It turns out the goo itself has taken over parenting duties from Eve, and is actually acting as the new womb for the ultimate being. This bun's finally done cooking, and god damn is it ugly. For being an
ultimate being.
It sure is lacking looks. He makes up for his lack of charm with raw power, as he causes ships around him to burst into flames just with his cry. At this point, everyone in the military is pretty much of the same opinion that they're out, they win. So everyone starts to evacuate. Aya decides to stay behind to face the monstrous baby by herself. This time Maeda insists that we take his final gift. He again is interrupted by Daniel and literally drug off by him. And unfortunately Maeda is unable to give us his final parting gift. As the
ultimate being
boards the ship, he strikes quite the imposing figure as he face plants off the ship rails. Presumably upset that everyone is snickering at him, he gives up on the whole walking thing and finally confronts us in combat. Remember how I said Eve would mess you up if you weren't prepared? Well, this guy is an absolute gauntlet. He has several different forms, each with devastating attacks that can murder you if you're unprepared. Also, if you die at any stage of the fight, you're back to the start of the fight. While I'm sure there is somebody out there who's taken this guy out with nothing but the billy club and no ammo, the average player may actually find themselves utterly screwed if they've saved in this area and aren't prepared. Unless you're using multiple save files, you're stuck here in this area, and there's no way to grind for more weapons or ammo. Thankfully, Wayne is in the previous scene to allow you to retrieve your stuff out of storage at least. This guy is no pushover, and he really takes a beating. Each time you take him out, he comes back bigger, stronger, and meaner. He's constantly evolving throughout the entire fight, starting out as a toddler, a child, a teenager, an adolescent. Eventually he evolves to the point where your bullets can't even harm him. While Aya is getting the smackdown of her life, Maeda whines to Daniel that, oh, if only I could have given her these special bullets. Turns out that his final gift, he was actually trying to give you special bullets with your mitochondria in them that would allow you to damage this hyper-evolved monstrosity. Realizing that he'd done goofed, Daniel does what only Daniel can do. He takes the bullets from Maeda and jumps out of the goddamn helicopter. As he free falls into the bay, he tosses us the clip. Just as he does this, he bursts into flame. But don't worry, he falls into the bay shortly after, putting the fire out. He's totally fine. That's how physics work, right?
I'm gonna have to call you back. Sir, we've explored what you've asked us, and it seems as though there's a little hiccup, actually.
Regardless of Daniel's current condition, we have a fight to win. With the new bullets we received, we can finally use that useless gun Maeda gave to us at the museum. And each bullet now does cap damage. We make quick work of this fiend afterwards. Having been bested in combat, the ultimate being tries to beat us in a dance-off. Unfortunately, our moves are too fire, and he collapses. And with that, it's finally over. GG! We've triumphed over Eve and stopped her plans for world domination. It's time to go Oh, come on. This game just doesn't know when to quit. The ultimate being gets up once more, and being out of super bullets, we're left with only one last chance to take this guy out. We have to blow up the entire ship with him still inside. This part of the game. This part. I hate this part of the game. Knowing what lies ahead, I had no problem clearing it this time around. But when I was younger, I remember this scene and this song. Gave me nightmares. You have to race to the center of the ship, running away from the ultimate being the entire time. If you are so much as grazed by this guy, it's game over. And do you know what that means? Back to the start of the entire fight you go. Admittedly, the path to the boiler room is pretty simple, but the whole sequence is unforgiving. If you take the wrong path, you don't get a chance to double back. And add that to the fact, the farther you go in, the faster this guy starts chasing you. It's giving me an anxiety attack just thinking about it. When you get to the boiler room, you must immediately flee the ship, and once you're outside, you are actually finally done. I'm serious this time, there's no more fighting. The game is over. Aya leaps overboard, leaving the ultimate being to explode inside the ship. Looking back, this scene really ratchets the tension up to 11 and breaks the knob off. It may just be my nostalgia talking, but as difficult as this scene was for me as a child, it really left a long-lasting impression.
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
What are you talking about?
So, the day is saved. Everyone can finally go back to their normal lives. Everyone meets up the next day. For some goddamn reason, they decide, for entertainment, they want to go to the opera.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
I mean, seriously, you've all been through some shit, and you've seen some things. And the first thing you want to do is go to the opera and dredge the memories of this whole thing back up? Regardless of the strange choice of entertainment, everyone heads into the opera to watch the show. Here we get a pretty hilarious scene, where Ben totally blocks Maeda, who looks like he's just about to make a confession to Aya, probably about having a mad crush on her. Everybody sits down, and we get another funny scene, where everyone on the team starts to panic when the play gets to the part where they're gonna burn the main actress. Again, pointing to the whole affair has left them all on edge. As we start to get ready to roll credits, the entire theater crowd gets a really bad case of glowing eyes. This leaves the entire ending of the game pretty ambiguous, but it's considered by most to be a bad ending, as the glowing red eyes may symbolize that Eve has taken over Aya and is going to repeat the entire cycle again with no opposition this time. To get the game's true ending, there is a new Game Plus mode where you can take on an optional dungeon in the Chrysler Building. At the end of this extremely long and difficult dungeon, you are confronted with a clone of your dead sister Maya, who's been taken over by Eve, who is cloned from the liver cells that gave Melissa her original powers. Ultimately, you win this fight, and Eve tries to take over Aya's body. But the spirit of Maya helps you fight it back, and finally, you're fully rid of Eve. While it is the good ending and considered the canonical ending, I'm not sure about that because at the end, Aya loses her parasitic powers, but come the second game, she totally has them back. So I'm not sure if they just didn't go with either ending or what they finally decided to do. Overall, I love this game. I think it's a great PlayStation classic for anyone looking for a great twist on an RPG or the survival horror genre. Its heavy focus on narrative storytelling and unique combat system make it a one-of-a-kind game. And that about wraps up my review of Parasite Eve. I hope you guys liked it. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Leave a comment down below if you liked this review. I know it was a really long one, so I'm glad to anyone who's watched to the end. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.